Hello all, welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. This week is week 7 of the 2022 college football season, and we have some absolutely monumental games on the schedule this week. We've got a number of top 25 matchups. We've got 2 top 10 matchups. Every Power 5 conference has a ranked matchup on this week's schedule. The Big Ten has a top 10 matchup. The SEC has a top 10 and another top 25 matchup. The ACC has a top 25 matchup. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 both have top 25 matchups on the docket. There are a lot of matchups that could have reverberations for the rest of the season regarding rankings and regarding college football playoff considerations later on this year. Before we get to this week's games, though, we need to review what happened in week 6 last week. There were 20 total picks that I made. I went 16-4 in those picks. There were a couple of unexpected losses that I suffered. One was BYU losing to Notre Dame. I did not envision that happening. And one was the Washington Huskies going down to Arizona State and getting beat after I said on this very channel 1 week ago, I remember the days when a Pac-12 leading Washington would go down to a school in Arizona and get beat by a team they had no business getting beat by. That's not going to happen again this week. Thanks, Washington. I also got the TCU-Kansas matchup wrong. That was the one top 25 matchup I got wrong last week. I'm not too upset about that one, though. Kansas comported themselves very well. That was a competitive game. The offenses got going in the second half. I don't think Kansas has anything to hold their head about in that game. They manned up. They played well. They just couldn't get the job done at the end, and TCU walked away with the victory. I was very happy with that game. It was a very good game to watch. My overall record after last week's performance is now 74-13, which is pretty good. As I mentioned, Kansas-TCU was the only one of the top 25 matchups I got wrong. I got the other 2 correct, so I was 2-1 in those games. 9-2 in top 25 matchups on the year, and there were no top 10 matchups last week, so I remain 1-0 on the season in top 10 matchups. That changes this week, though, because there are 2 huge top 10 matchups to discuss. We should just jump into the week 7 picks then, shouldn't we? So let's get to it. We're going to begin with the number 1 team in the nation, the Georgia Bulldogs. They are home against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt ain't no good. Georgia is very good, especially at football. Go with the Georgia Bulldogs in that matchup. The number 2 team in the nation, the Ohio State Buckeyes, have a bye week this week before a matchup at home versus Iowa, so no pick for Ohio State. In the first of the top 10 matchups, we have a gigantic battle in the SEC between the number 3 Alabama Crimson Tide, coming off an eked-out victory at home last week against Texas A&M. They are on the road this week at number 6 ranked Tennessee. The biggest consideration in this matchup is the status of Alabama QB Bryce Young. Young missed last week's game against Texas A&M due to a shoulder injury, an AC joint sprain on his throwing arm that he suffered the week prior against Arkansas. His backup, Jalen Milroe, got the start and had an up-and-down game. He threw a couple of touchdown passes, but also fumbled a couple of times and threw a pick. That gave Texas A&M a couple of short fields that they then took advantage of and stayed in that game longer than they would have if Bryce Young had started that game. In terms of the statistics for the 2 teams, nothing really stands out that much. They're both roughly equivalent at rushing the ball. Tennessee is, as you would expect, much better at throwing the ball. They average almost 100 yards more per game than Alabama does. Both teams are holding their opponents to less than 90 rushing yards a game, which is important considering the status of Bryce Young. If he cannot go this week, which the most recent news I was able to find was a radio interview that Nick Saban, Alabama's head coach, did, where he said that Bryce Young has practiced, he's made some progress in practice, but he's uncertain for the game tomorrow. It's going to be left up to him and how he feels and how the medical staff on Alabama feels about him playing. So as far as I've been able to determine at the time I'm filming this video, Bryce Young's status is uncertain. If he cannot go and Jalen Milroe starts, Alabama will be a run-first team like they were against Texas A&M last week, which plays into Tennessee's strength. If Alabama is primarily going to run the ball, they'll get yards if they're just constantly running. But it works in Tennessee's favor because their run defense is very good, and they'll be able to get a number of 3-and-outs that will give their high-powered offense the ball back. Speaking of that high-powered offense, if they want to have success against an Alabama defense that is still very stout and put a lot of pressure on Texas A&M's quarterback Haynes King last week, they're going to have to get the ball out of QB Hendon Hooker's hands very quickly. Tennessee likes to run a very fast offense where they call plays quickly, they line up at the line of scrimmage quickly, and then they run the plays very quickly. It's designed to wear out the defense, tire them out, and then open up the running game and open up open receivers who are just outrunning tired defensive backs. That offensive scheme is a double-edged sword, though, because it can work in the way I've just stated, but also if you're not executing it well, you can end up going 3-and-out in about a minute, and then your defense has to go right back out on the field and might have to defend against a 4 or 5 minute long drive from your opponents. Then you get the ball back and go 3-and-out in 45 seconds, and your defense gets tired because they're running ragged because your offense can't produce. If I'm Tennessee, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spread Alabama out and make them cover the entire width of the field, sideline to sideline. Bubble screens, wide receiver screens, tosses to running backs in the flat. Make those Alabama linebackers, safeties, and cornerbacks run. Make them move. Make them have to cover a lot of territory and tire them out. And to make sure that those stud defensive linemen that Alabama has can't get to my quarterback, Hendon Hooker, throw the ball fast. 2 3-step drop, throw it. 2 3-step drop, throw it. Quick slants, bubble screens, that kind of thing. Don't let him get hit. Don't let Alabama's defensive linemen tee off on him, and use receivers, tight ends, and running backs and their running routes to have to engage Alabama's linebackers in the passing game and defending against that, rather than running blitzes against Hooker as the quarterback. Pardon me. Alabama's won 15 straight matchups against Tennessee in this series. This is at Tennessee. It's the CBS game of the week. Neyland Stadium can hold well over 100,000 screaming fans who are going to be turning out in force to see whether or not they finally can overcome the beast that is Alabama. Because of the uncertainty of Bryce Young's status, and because of the uncertainty about his injury, meaning even if he did start, how well is he going to play in this game? Especially against a Tennessee defensive line that can get after the quarterback like they did last week in their big win against LSU on the road. Because of that uncertainty, because this is at Tennessee, because the fans are going to be going crazy, because the law of averages says that after 15 straight wins, at some point, Tennessee has to win the game, I think this is that some point. I think Tennessee's offense will be a match for Alabama's defense. I think even if Bryce Young plays, he's not going to be 100%. If he doesn't play, the Alabama passing attack is much, much reduced, and that plays into Tennessee's strength. I think a lot is going in Tennessee's favor in this one. Go with the Volunteers to score the upset over the number 3 team in the nation, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Number 4, the Clemson Tigers. They are on the road at Florida State. Florida State has been a nice story this season. After a couple of rough years under head coach Mike Norvell, they seem to have gotten their act together. They started out undefeated. They lost a couple of games in a row. They lost one at home to Wake Forest a couple of weeks ago. They lost one on the road as NC State came back and beat them last week. Clemson's defense has been very good this season, has kept them in many of the games they've played. Their offense, other than the game against Wake Forest where they produced, hasn't been that good with quarterback DJU playing kind of pedestrian. They struggled a bit in the early going against Boston College on the road last week. I think the offense is going to struggle again a little bit against Florida State, who has a decent defense. I think Florida State's offense, though, is going to struggle against Clemson's defense. Look for Clemson's D to once again keep them in this game. I'm going to go with Clemson on this one because I just don't think Florida State has what it takes to hang with Clemson just yet. Go with the Clemson Tigers in that matchup. In the second of our top 10 matchups on the weekend, the number 5 ranked team in the nation, the Michigan Wolverines. They are hosting the number 10 ranked Penn State Nittany Lions. Once again, when you look at the stats, nothing really stands out too much. In terms of offense, Michigan, as it has been the last couple of years under head coach Jim Harbaugh, is very balanced. They're running the ball for 212 a game, and they're passing the ball for 246 a game. Defensively, they're playing very good defense. They're holding their opponents to 165 through the air and 81 yards on the ground rushing. Penn State, though, is not exactly a slouch. They're not running the ball quite as much as U of M is, but it's only a difference of about 20 yards a game. And they're just about the same in terms of pass yards a game. They're letting up more pass yards than U of M is, though, 262 compared to 165 for the Wolverines. Pardon me. But they also are holding their opponents to less than 80 yards a game on the ground, 79 yards to 81 for Michigan. So, again, stat-wise, nothing really stands out here. Penn State does turn the ball over a little bit more than the Wolverines do, although the 4 fumbles lost for Penn State all came in the game last week against Northwestern at home in a monsoon when turnovers were aplenty in that game. Penn State does have 7 fumble recoveries and 5 interceptions, and U of M's got 4 interceptions. So, again, nothing really stands out. U of M's a bit better on third down than Penn State is. So again, just like last week, the stats don't really lead to a clear determination of who I think the better team is and who I think is going to win the game. So you have to go to the intangibles. It's at Michigan. There's over 100,000 fans that are going to be ready to go because they know Penn State's a good team. They know it's a top 10 matchup. They know this has ramifications for a potential berth in the Big Ten title game later on this year because both Penn State and U of M are in the Big Ten East. Pardon me. So that would lean in favor of Michigan. Penn State, though, this is a revenge game for them. Michigan won this game 21-17 at Happy Valley last year. That would lean in Penn State's favor. Penn State also has a quarterback in Sean Clifford who, he's not the biggest guy. He doesn't have the biggest arm. He doesn't make the best decisions sometimes. He's not the best running quarterback, but he's good enough in all of those categories that he's a good quarterback. And he's got this intangible it factor. He's a gamer. He's just a dude that goes out there and plays and wins and seemingly can will his team to victory. Earlier this year, they were on the road at Purdue. Clifford wasn't playing well until the final drive of the game when they needed him to play well, when he manned up and led them to the score that got them that win. He led the offensive charge against Auburn a few weeks ago on the road in SEC country when they absolutely dismantled them and took them apart. Sean Clifford is a clutch guy, and he is someone who just has that charisma on the college level that doesn't always translate well to the pro level, but he's got it on the college level that gets the team to believe in him and can pull out wins. That seems to lean in Penn State's favor. On Michigan's side, J.J. McCarthy just seems to be the piece that's been missing for for U of M the last couple of years. They've had very good running backs, they've had very good defense, but they haven't had real great quarterback play. It seems like they've got very good quarterback play in J.J. McCarthy, and everything just seems to be clicking with him. It seems like all the gears of Michigan's offense were just not in sync, and then you insert McCarthy, and then everything's just running smooth and everything's working the way that Michigan wants it to work. That seems to lean in favor of Michigan. Penn State has a very good back seven on defense. They've got a couple of very good defensive backs who are going to make life difficult for J.J. McCarthy, which means they might have to rely on Blake Corum and the running game a little bit more, which might play in to Penn State's strength because they're very good at defending against the run. That maybe would lean towards Penn State. Michigan, on the other hand, after they played their very pathetic non-conference schedule and beat the hell out of everybody, when they got into Big Ten play, they seemed to be not as much of a juggernaut. They only won by 7 points against Maryland. They didn't play all that well against an offensively challenged Iowa team. They won by about 13 points in that game, which you would think they would have beaten Iowa by a little bit more. It seems like they're coming down a little bit as the competition improves, and they've got a competitor in Penn State that, while I don't think Penn State this year is the cream of the crop level for the Big Ten, I think that's reserved right now for OSU and Michigan. They're in that next tier as being a really, really good team. And that, I think, leans kind of in Penn State's favor in this matchup. This is a really tough one to call. My gut is telling me, though, that Michigan is going to do the bare minimum they need to get through this game. My gut is telling me that Penn State's going to make some mistake at a vital moment, and Michigan's going to get the ball back and kick a field goal at the end to win the game, or score a touchdown at the end to complete a comeback and win the game. I picture this game being a low-scoring game. I picture this one being a lot of defense. I picture this one being not a lot of offense. I picture this one being hard-hitting. I picture it being close. Close enough to the point that a mistake here, a mistake there, is going to turn the tide on this one. And I think Michigan will do just barely enough to go to 7-0 and beat Penn State. Despite the fact that another intangible here that I forgot to mention is that Penn State had a bye week last week. Normally, I would go with a team that's had a bye week, but for some reason, I can't even really express it, but for some reason, my gut is just telling me that if I were to go with Penn State, Michigan is just going to end up bombing them out of the house. My gut is telling me that Michigan will do enough to get by Penn State. So I am going to go with the Michigan Wolverines in the second of the top 10 matchups on the schedule for this week. Number 6, the Tennessee Volunteers. As I said a moment ago, I believe that they are going to beat the number 3 team, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Number 7, the USC Trojans in the Pac-12's biggest matchup of the day. They are traveling to the mountains to take on number 20 Utah. Utah has a very balanced attack between the running game and the passing game. USC is a little bit better at passing than they are at running. They're both pretty good on third down. USC doesn't turn the ball over as much as Utah does, but Utah and USC's defenses both turn their opponents over very often. USC's got 12 picks on the year. Utah's got 10 interceptions. Again, stats don't really tell me that much. This game is being played at Utah. It's a night game at Utah. You can ask Oregon how easy it is to play Utah at night in their own home stadium. Thank you very much. Also, I was listening to Joel Klatt, who is the play-by-play guy on the A team, the A broadcast team for Fox. He's got a YouTube show, and he was saying that USC has one defensive weakness, and it's their run defense. They're letting up about 198 yards a game on the ground, which isn't great. But he made a good point, though, when he said USC has been able to disguise that defensive deficiency by playing with a lead. They get out by a touchdown, 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, and they get their opponent out of their game plan, and they force their opponent to have to throw the ball to keep up with them. In games where that USC offense hasn't been able to do that, like against Arizona State and against Washington State last week, games have been much closer and much tighter. And those teams that USC should probably be winning and probably be beating They're hanging around. And if you remember, I had commented last week that I didn't know if USC's defense was good enough to keep them in a game if that offense sputtered. We saw last week Washington State hung in that game. We saw in the first half of the week of the game against Arizona State that they hung in that game. So I think Clad and I are kind of on the same wavelength here. And he also made the comment that there are two teams that USC is going to face that can expose that weakness. One is UCLA, their crosstown rival. The other is Utah. Given what Clad has said, which I agree with about USC and Utah, given that this game is at Utah, given that this game is at night and the Utah crowd is going to be going crazy. Also, given that in the Pac-12 the last few years, the story is that they've been, according to Chris Childers from ESPNU Radio, the conference of good, not the conference of great. They have good teams, but no one of them seems to be able to dominate the conference and be considered for a playoff berth. I don't know if that's going to change this year with Chip Kelly and Lincoln Riley and Dan Lanning in Oregon, but until I see it happen, I'm not going to believe that it's going to happen. I don't think that USC or UCLA will get through a Pac-12 schedule unscathed. And I think this is the game that USC is going to drop. I'm going to go with the Utah Utes in this matchup to upset the number 7 team in the nation, the USC Trojans. Go with Utah in that matchup. I also think Utah's a bit desperate because they know they have to keep pace with USC and UCLA in the Pac-12 South. They've already lost to UCLA. They cannot lose to USC. That's another factor, I think, in why Utah's going to win that game, because they'll play a bit desperate. In the Big 12, we've got a huge matchup between number 8, the Oklahoma State Cowboys, on the road, at number 13, TCU. TCU is coming off a big win on the road against Kansas in a fabulous game that I very much enjoyed watching last week. And then before that, a beatdown of the Oklahoma Sooners. They are returning home to face the number 8 team in the nation, conference rival Oklahoma State. If we look at the stats, again, TCU's a little bit better at running the ball. OK State's a little bit better at passing the ball. OK State's a little bit better at rush defense. TCU's a little bit better at pass defense. They're both about the same in third down. They both have turned the ball over a couple of times and have scored some turnovers in their favor. So, once again, got to go to some of the intangibles on this. Oklahoma State did not have a good game last week against Texas Tech at home. They were down for much of that game. Their defense picked it up and allowed their offense to eventually get them the win in that game. But it exposed that Oklahoma State might not be playing their sharpest football as we hit the midway point in the season. Maybe they're getting a little bit tired. Maybe they're getting a little bit loose. They also had a few injuries in that game. They got banged up a bit by the Red Raiders last week, including quarterback Spencer Sanders, who in the post-game conference had his shoulder iced up, and he had received some shots to handle some hits he was taking to his midsection and some soreness and discomfort he was feeling there. Is he going to be back at 100% for the game against TCU? I don't know. He's not banged up enough to not start, but it's a question of, can he continue to take hits and still stay in games? Can TCU's defense put enough pressure on him? Can they hit him a few times? Can they make him uncomfortable? And can they affect his production? His counterpart, TCU's quarterback, Max Duggan, is playing exceptionally well. He played very well against Kansas last week. He played very well against Oklahoma the week before. I just feel like Oklahoma they're kind of wobbling. They're still playing okay, but they're a little bit off balance. I think TCU is hitting on all cylinders right now. So again, I'm going to go with another upset, and I'm going to go with TCU. It's at home. They've already seen their team blow out one team from Oklahoma. I don't think they're going to blow out OK State, but I think they get the win. I think if they get a win here, I think Oklahoma State is a bit banged up. I think they're a little bit on shaky ground. I think TCU seems like they are running on all cylinders offensively and defensively. I'm going to go with number 13 TCU in the upset in the Big 12 against number 8 Okie State. Number 9, Ole Miss. They are home versus Auburn. Auburn is not that good this year. Go with Ole Miss to continue their winning ways. Number 10, Penn State. I've already said I think is going to lose on the road at Michigan tomorrow. Number 11, UCLA. They have a bye week this week. Number 12, Oregon. They also have a bye week this week. And those two teams are playing each other next week. It's at Oregon in another big matchup in the Pac-12, one that I'm very much looking forward to seeing. But they have bye weeks this week, so no picks for either of them. Number 13, TCU, as I've just said, I believe that they are going to beat Oklahoma State at home. Number 14, Wake Forest. They also have a bye this week. Number 15, North Carolina State. They are on the road at number 18, the Syracuse Orange. Just like Kansas, it is a pleasant surprise seeing Syracuse doing so well in football. College football is better when situations like this happen. Syracuse is a little bit better at running the ball than NC State is, and they're a little bit better at run defense than NC State is. NC State they're about equal, the two teams, at throwing the ball, and they're about equal in their pass defense. Syracuse is a little bit better on third down. They haven't turned the ball over as much, but they haven't scored as many turnovers as NC State has. This game's at Syracuse, so the Carrier Dome is going to be rocking as NC State comes to town. NC State needs this win, though. Their only loss in the season was on the road at Clemson, who they're in the same division with of the ACC. NC State, Clemson, Syracuse, they're all in the ACC Atlantic Division. NC State, they need this win to keep pace with Clemson and to keep pace with Syracuse, in the hopes that maybe something happens to Clemson and they drop a couple of games and NC State can sneak their way in to a conference championship berth. But they can't do that if they drop this game to Syracuse. Also, NC State has a little more experience in big games like this than do the Orange. They've been in a big game on the road earlier this year. They've got a big game. They've played in a couple of big games last year. They've got a little more experience in tense, big pressure-filled game atmosphere than Syracuse does, that hasn't really experienced this too much. Is this game going to be a little too much for Syracuse to be able to handle? I think it will be. I think the experience of NC State in matchups like this is going to pay off. Give me the Wolfpack to give the Orange their first loss of the season. Number 16, Mississippi State, in the SEC's other top 25 matchup, is on the road against Kentucky. The biggest consideration here for me is the status of Kentucky's quarterback, Will Levis. I did not know that he was out of the game against South Carolina last week, and that's a big part of the reason why they lost that game. He is back in action. He's going to start for Kentucky this week. The report that I read said that he had a very good week of practice, but I don't know if that foot injury might be a bit lingering once he gets into full game action against a Mississippi State defense, which is pretty good. It's holding its opponents to 138 on the ground and 219 through the air. So we'll see if that injury nags Levis in this game. The biggest stat that stuck out to me when I was doing some research for this was the fact that Kentucky is only running the ball for 92 yards a game. That's not very good. That's even less than Mississippi State, who runs what's called the air raid offense, where they almost never actually run the ball. They use short passes to the edges and to running backs to take the place of running plays. And they're still running the ball for 14 more yards per game than Kentucky is. That ain't good, Kentucky. Mississippi State has also thrown the ball around for 354 yards a game. Quarterback Will Levis has over 2,000 yards passing. He's got 22 touchdowns as opposed to just 3 interceptions on the year. Kentucky, I think, wants this game because losing to South Carolina who is also in the SEC East with Kentucky, is bad because Kentucky's trying to keep pace with Tennessee and Georgia, who are also in the SEC East. And dropping that game to South Carolina really puts them behind the 8 ball. However, despite the fact that it's at Kentucky, it's a night game, and they really, really need this win, Mississippi State quarterback Will Rogers and that offense just seem like they're rolling. They just seem like they're playing very good football. Their defense is playing good football. Just like with TCU, Okie State, I think Kentucky is also on the ropes a little bit. I think Mississippi State is running on all cylinders right now. I'm going to go with the Mississippi State Bulldogs to go on the road. Pardon me. To go on the road and get the victory against Kentucky. Number 17, Kansas State. They have a bye this week, so no pick for them. Number 18, Syracuse. As I've just said, I think they are going to lose to NC State at home tomorrow. Number 19, Kansas, coming off their loss at home versus TCU. They're on the road against an Oklahoma team that is now 3-3 with 3 losses in the Big 12, a beatdown against TCU 2 weeks ago, and the largest margin of victory the largest margin of loss, ever against Texas in a 49-0 absolute woodhousing in the Red River Showdown. It was embarrassing for Oklahoma. It was shameful for Oklahoma to get beat by Texas by that many points and not even score a point in the game. I think in this matchup, Oklahoma comes into this game mad. Like rage mad. Like Incredible Hulk mad. After having been embarrassed, not just by TCU on the road, but just absolutely taken to the house and just demolished by Texas in the Cotton Bowl. I think it has led this week to head coach Brent Venables, his coaching staff, and his players really doing an honest evaluation of their team and making changes that they think are necessary to get back on track and win some games. For Oklahoma, you ain't winning the Big 12 this year. Unless something catastrophic happens with about 4 or 5 other teams, you ain't going to the Big 12 championship game, Oklahoma. They can win 6 games and qualify for a bowl this season, and they can play spoiler for teams like Kansas, for teams like Oklahoma State down the road. And that's probably going to be the mentality that they're going to get into. Also, they get their starting quarterback, Dillon Gabriel, back. He missed the second half of the game against TCU and the game last week against Texas because he was going through concussion protocol. He has passed those protocols and he is back in action. He will start and he will make their offense better. I'm not going to say their offense is going to be good, but they'll be better than they were last week against Texas. I have to believe. Also, speaking of quarterbacks, Kansas's star starting quarterback, Jalen Daniels, is out of this game. He suffered a shoulder injury against TCU in a loss last week. His backup, Jason Bean, came in and played phenomenally well through 4 touchdown passes, kept them in that game. He is a 5th-year quarterback who transferred in from North Texas, so he's got experience playing in games. However, I've seen this happen numerous times where a backup quarterback comes into a game unexpectedly and doesn't have any time to think about what he's doing. He just plays on sheer instinct and plays well. But then the next game, even though that quarterback, that backup QB, has had a week to prepare, a week to work with the ones, a week to work with the coaches in a different way, a week to get mentally prepared for being the starter, that second week seems like there's some backsliding and they don't do as well because it's not so spontaneous and they had time to think. I believe that's going to happen this time. And I believe, despite the fact that Oklahoma got demolished last week, for the reasons I've mentioned, they're angry, their backs are against the wall, Kansas' starting quarterback is out, Dillon Gabriel, Oklahoma's starting quarterback, is in, I'm going to call another upset. I should have named this as the upset picks is what I should have done, because I'm calling upsets all over the place. I think Oklahoma at home is going to rebound, and I think they're going to hand Kansas their second loss of the season. Number 20, the Utah Utes, as I've already said, they are going to beat number 7, I think. Yeah, number 7, USC at home this week. Number 21, Cincinnati, they have a bye this week, so no pick for them. Number 22, Texas, coming off that win against Oklahoma. They are returning home to take on Iowa State. I do not envision a letdown game for Texas on this one. Rather, I think this game helps build Texas's momentum going forward. And I think they go on a little bit of a run. Not like a 5 or 6 or 8, 7 game winning streak, but I think they're going to win 2 or 3 in a row here. And I think they're going to get Iowa State at home. Go with the Longhorns of Texas in that matchup. Kentucky, as I've said, coming in at number 22. For some reason, the pollsters saw fit to tie Texas and Kentucky at a ranking of 22, which make a pick, would you? Pick one of them. None of this tie bull crap. So, number 22, also, the Kentucky Wildcats, as I've said, I think they're going to lose to Mississippi State at home tomorrow. Number 24, the Illinois Illini at 5-1 on the season. They're home against Minnesota. I know nothing about Illinois. I watched a little bit of their game earlier this season against Wyoming, and that's it. I know very little about Minnesota, other than they pounded my Spartans at home and then went on to lose in Minnesota to Purdue and only scored 10 points doing so. Seems like Minnesota may be a bit of an up and down team. I'm going to say that they're down this week. I'm going to say that Illinois is going to get the win. Let's get the Illini to 6-1 and qualifying for a bowl. Pardon me. And then maybe the most surprising thing is the number 25 team in the nation, a team who has bumped up from Division 2, the FCS, to FBS or Division 1 this year for the first time. The James Madison Dukes from Virginia are the 25th ranked team in the nation. They're 5-0. I believe they're in the Sun Belt Conference. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, but I think they're in the Sun Belt Conference. They beat Appalachian State earlier this year. They're 5-0. They're on the road at Georgia Southern. I don't know anything about Georgia Southern other than they beat Nebraska at Nebraska a couple of weeks ago. I don't know anything about James Madison other than when they were an FCS team, it seems like they always played second fiddle to North Dakota State. James Madison, I think, has an FCS championship recently, but it seems like every time they would go up against North Dakota State, they would come up short. Now they're bumping up to FBS. They're 5-0. They've beaten Appalachian State. They're ranked in the top 25. Let's go, Dukes. I'm going to take James Madison in this one because why not? It's a hell of a story, so let's roll with the Dukes from James Madison. That does it for my picks for Week 7 of the college football season. How do you think this week's going to go? Where do you think I've gone right with my picks? Where do you think I've gone wrong with my picks? What game are you looking forward to watching, or what games, plural, are you looking forward to watching? Is it one of the ones I've talked about here? Is there another game that I haven't discussed that you think is flying under the radar? Let me know in the comment section below. That does it for this video. Thanks so much, as always, for tuning in, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in the next video.